Greetings and good day and assalamu alaikum. This is Heather Mehdi on Heather Mehdi's Perspectives, and my most eminent guest today is Professor Noam Chomsky. Professor Chomsky, welcome to the program.
Pleased to be with you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Professor, many in Pakistan know about you, the vast majority. Just to set some context, Professor Noam Chomsky is arguably the greatest living intellectual in the world today, perhaps in the past 2 centuries, and he needs no introduction. He's been a great fighter for human rights and an author of dozens of books on the fight against fascism, totalitarianism, especially within the US system. Professor, the reason we have Professor Chomsky here today is to ask him about what's happening in Pakistan and his views, because a lot has happened since I and Professor Chomsky spoke about 7-8 months ago. Professor Chomsky, just to bring you up to date, as we speak today, over 10,000 people have been illegally, and I say illegally, arrested, abducted by the government, illegally put into custody, being tortured. Young women and girls are being picked up, molested. Teenagers as young as 13, 14 years old who are just standing outside their houses holding a placard saying, we want constitutional rights and we want fair and free elections, have been arrested. Dozens of journalists who support this have been arrested in illegal confinement. The Pakistan's leading investigative journalist, Arshad Sharif, was hounded out of Pakistan and subsequently assassinated in Kenya. Another very brave soul, Imran Khan is his name, has been in the custody of intelligence agencies, and we still don't know where he is. There is great fear that he may actually have been tortured to death, and they're not producing him in court. Senators, members of parliament supporting the PTI of Prime Minister Imran Khan, and civil society leaders, people like myself, are under great threat of death and blackmail. Imran himself has got 150 cases registered against him. 2 assassination attempts have been made. 70 people have been killed in violence about 3 days ago when Imran was brutally attempted to arrest him, which was later turned illegal by the Supreme Court. I can go on, but what is so worrying, Professor Chomsky, is the complete silence of the US and the civil society in the US and the human rights bodies in the US towards this massive trampling and suppression and Stalinist type fascism that has overtaken Pakistan.
Well, the simple reason for it is that there's no reporting. Nobody knows about it. If you can't know about it, you can't protest it. You take a look at the media, you'll find a couple of words here and there indicating that there are civil rights violations, but as if they appear everywhere in the world, which they do. Until there's information spreading, nobody will know. This is quite common, incidentally, unless there are solidarity organizations which break through the media silence. Most things aren't known, even huge atrocities. So just take one example that I worked on for decades, probably the closest to true genocide in the post-Second World War period was the US-backed Indonesian invasion of East Timor. Wiped out maybe a third of the population. Nothing. Took years to try to get any information to the public. Solidarity, small numbers of groups, I was part of them, worked very hard, but it literally took a couple of decades before you could finally break through, get enough public pressure so that the Clinton administration was forced to call off the Indonesian massacres, and they survived barely. but it's true of many other things. There are things that are covered so misleadingly that you don't get to understand them. So take the invasion of Iraq. To this day, that's described as the liberation of Iraq. Nobody talks about the invasion of Ukraine as the liberation of Ukraine. Maybe they do in Moscow, but nowhere else. But here, the major journals, leading liberal journals, talk about the liberation of Iraq, which didn't go so well. There has not, we're now 20 years into after the invasion. You won't find, you'll be hard to find one phrase anywhere in the mainstream that says it was anything more than a mistake. We don't say that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a mistake. I mean, actually, it was a mistake, but that's not why we criticize it. We're now after 50 years from after the signing of the peace agreement on Vietnam. That'll be the 50th anniversary. In the 50 years, try to find someone anywhere near the mainstream who called it what it is, a major attack primarily against South Vietnam. The peasant society destroyed it, spread and devastated the rest of Indochina. All you can see is it was a noble effort to protect South Vietnam from North Vietnamese aggression. I mean, that's the story. Pakistan, there aren't, to my knowledge, there are no solidarity groups, or if they are, they are very quiet. So nothing breaks over the media silence. If the United States had a particular interest in this, like if Pakistan was a Chinese satellite or a Russian satellite, yeah, then you'd have news about it. But since the U.S. has been backing the Pakistani military all through Pakistan's history, they have no interest in bringing this up. So it's going to, just like every other case, there'll be silence unless people know. People won't know unless there are organized groups that are breaking through suppression, silence, and distortion. That's the way cities work.
So, Professor Chomsky, in this day of social media awareness, where, literally as Imran was being abducted in his courtroom, the military goons and the rangers were grabbing him by the scruff of the neck. Foreign media was there. Day before yesterday, there was attempts to again storm his house in Lahore. At that point in time, he invited the international media because the police said 40 terrorists are being harbored in Imran's house. He invited the international media to his house. They came, they saw, they interviewed him. So they're aware. It's not that they're not, or at least their representatives are aware, their stringers are aware, their reps in Pakistan are aware. But somehow this doesn't it doesn't go back into being shown on CBS or ABC or NBC or CNN or the Today Show.
Well, I don't know the particular journalists who are in Pakistan right now.
Okay.
There are in many places. I've had lots of experience over the last 70 years. There are journalists on the ground often who do report accurately and honestly what is happening. Doesn't get through to the media. You may find it on the Associated Press wires where they just report raw data, but from there to the major media has to go through many filters of doctrine, propaganda, pressure, beliefs, fixed beliefs, and so on. So I don't know in this case. I don't know the journalists. I don't know what's happening, but it could be, it's possible that it's being honestly and accurately reported, but not getting to the public. That's happened in other cases.
So, Professor Chomsky, what do you advise former Prime Minister Imran Khan to do in this case? How do we break through these massive filters of not just U.S. media or opinion makers in Congress and the Senate, even in the European parliaments? It seems like we are children of a lesser god, Professor. We're a nuclear-armed state. So what is your advice for Prime Minister Imran?
The only thing that has ever worked in case after case, very much like this, often much worse, as in the cases I mentioned, there have to be organized efforts inside the Western countries to try to compel the major media to face what's happening, compel the intellectual community to face it, organize groups so that people will know about it. Can take years, decades. I mentioned say Palestine. I mean, for decades, it was impossible for me and other people to give a talk on Israel, Palestine, even at my own university, without police protection, literally. Okay, it finally changed after 50 years. Okay, I mentioned the East Timor case. Say Turkey. During the 1990s, Turkey was carrying out horrendous atrocities against the Kurdish population. Tens of thousands of people killed, thousands of towns and villages wiped out, hundreds of thousands of refugees driven to slums in Istanbul. Not a word. A couple of us were trying hard. It was never broke through. To this day, nobody knows about it. Just have to, if there's another way, it hasn't been discovered.
Professor Chomsky, so there's somebody like me. I live in North America and Canada. I interview a lot of people in Pakistan. I've interviewed some people in English from the West, yourself and some others. Is there a particular narrative that will resonate? Is there a particular soundbite that will resonate with the U.S. policymakers, senators, congressmen, media, that pricks their conscience or alerts them to something? Are we doing something wrong? Is there something that we should be doing differently?
There are no tricks, and there's no formulas that are made, except the facts. You have to try to bring people together, understand the facts, organize to reach others, set up bigger meetings, invite, or if you're in Canada, invite there are some quite good journalists in Canada, invite them, talk to them. It's the only way it can be done. Invite parliamentary representatives. There are some quite good ones. See if they'll pick up something. It's hard, dedicated work. Over time, it can succeed, but there are no special tricks, just hard work. And it's case after case. Pakistan's not alone. Pakistan's unusual because people don't even know about it. In fact, if you ask your neighbor, wherever you live, where's Pakistan? They may say in Latin America. They probably don't even know where it is. Try it.
So, which brings me to this other point about the kind of narrative that's being built up by the Western media, Professor Chomsky. So Imran is very open and accessible to the world media. Media house after media house interviews every day, US, European, Middle Eastern. But the kind of questions they ask him are the kind of questions they really should be asking the government, which is inflicting this massive fascism. But the questions they ask Imran are as if he's responsible for this violence, not the government. I mean, traditionally, we have seen that wherever there's been trampling of human rights and there are some journalists who come, they are putting the government on the mat and they're saying, why are these people arrested? What is this illegal torture that's happening? Why was this done? But they seem to have been holding Imran responsible. I can't understand this this massive change of the American, Western, European mindset in how to approach an issue like this.
These are highly indoctrinated societies. George Orwell wrote about this 80 years ago in an essay which typically was suppressed about censorship in free England, found 50 years later in his unpublished papers, because not what they want to hear. And you have to try to break through on major issues. It's not simple. I could give you a long list. I mentioned a couple, but they're all the same. First of all, you have to break through ignorance. I don't know about where you are, but in the United States, I don't think many people even know where Pakistan is, literally. I could give you many examples. Well, they have to break through ignorance, suppression, filters. How many people in the United States know how critical U.S. military support has been to the partially repressive regimes in Pakistan ever since its founding? How many people in the United States know that Ronald Reagan was assisting Pakistan in developing nuclear weapons while he was condemning it formally? Practically nobody. Ask people. They don't know. It doesn't get reported. When you say interviews, like I have endless interviews, not with the mainstream media, virtually never. It's, but they're very closed. They don't want to hear these voices.
So really, if I understand, Professor, you're saying that there are no shortcuts, there are no magic wands, there are no tricks.
Just hard work. I've been trying to do it for most of my life. It's always the same. I mean, take, say, Vietnam, the biggest crime since the Second World War. In the early 1960s, Kennedy sharply escalated the war. You literally couldn't get 5 people together in somebody's living room to talk about it. The line was, we're defending against communist aggression. That's the end of the story. It took years of work, even when there were 600,000 American troops there, so you couldn't ignore it. Still, it was hard to break through.
What is a message that you have for Prime Minister Imran Khan? And I want you to please address him directly and saying, Prime Minister Imran, if I were you, this is what I would advise you to do to save Pakistan from fascism.
I wouldn't presume to provide a message. He knows much better than I do. I can offer sympathy, and try to make efforts to overcome the ignorance, distortion, deceit. But from where I sit, thousands of miles away, there's literally nothing more. People who do follow it closely, like you do, who can get the information directly from Pakistan, which I can't, can begin to try to do the organizational, informational work, which will slowly lead to the point where pressures can be imposed in the way that I mentioned. Organize people, invite journalists, invite parliamentary representatives, present petitions. These are all the measures. I mean, we live in pretty free societies, after all. Lots of opportunities open to us. You have to take them. Nothing else, no other possibility.
Professor Chomsky, thank you for that. Appreciate that. The second is about me, and I'm just sharing something that somebody unknown to me wrote about me, and I'm just going to read out the last paragraph. But and then I want to ask, what would you advise somebody like me to do? Because what they're saying about me, and it's a long thing, but they're saying his views are widely followed by Pakistanis, and he has played a significant role in shaping the country's political discourse. This has been written in the West about me, and there's a lot about my views about democracy, etc. So, what is your advice for somebody like me to be able to get through to mainstream journalists? Because I've not been able to do that, so I can bring my voice to them.
As an individual, can't do very much. If you have an organization, you can. I mean, tell you personal experiences. So, for example, when I was in the 60s, when I was trying to develop some kind of opposition to the Indochina wars, I would work with groups of neighbors and friends, get to the point where we could get, say, 20 people together in my living room, invite our congressional representative to come to talk to the group. Well, you can do things like that. You can get to know the local journalists, as I did. Finally got quite friendly with a number of them. Good newspaper. They began to write about it. You can't do it alone. You can do it if you manage to get a group of people who can be noticed, can work together. It's the same thing if you're in a poor neighborhood and you want to get a traffic light. An individual can't do anything. They get a group of mothers together to go to the city council, maybe they can get a traffic light. That's the way things work.
I do understand, Professor. Thank you for that. What really still is mind-boggling, Imran Khan has been an international figure for 50 years. He was a international sportsperson, married to Jemima, celebrity. The world knows him. Everybody knows him. He's now under massive danger of being assassinated. Pakistan, and just that celebrity status of him still hasn't been able to get people in mainstream media to pick up his story.
I'd suggest an experiment.
Okay.
Go around your neighborhood, find out how many people have ever heard of him. I mean, in countries where there's cricket, if you're in Australia, people would have heard of him. You're in Canada, United States, I'll bet almost nobody's ever heard of him. And as a political figure, they wouldn't know him in Australia either. They know him or India. India, yes, of course, but in England, let's say, they'd know him as a cricket player.
Professor Chomsky, leave it a minute. Professor Chomsky, is this somehow that we can seek your support in spreading the message, introducing us to people you think who have powerful voices? Somebody like me, I can go and talk to them. I can give them interviews. I can interview them. I'm really desperately looking for specific actionable advice and recommendations.
You have to understand that I'm very much at the margins.
Yes.
Access to the media. I think the things you can do are wherever you are, use your local position, organize people locally to be concerned about it, appeal to your own parliamentary, you're in Canada, right?
Yes.
Yeah, appeal to your parliamentary representative, local journalists, maybe the local newspaper, gradually build up from there. Try to build up similar groups in other cities. See if you can then coordinate and work together maybe some in England. I'm sure there are big Pakistani community, might be groups there. And that way you can slowly build things up. There aren't any secrets, just steady work.
And of course, there are vested interests on the side of the U.S. administration and the government to keep supporting a military-backed regime, which is also what we're up against. Professor Chomsky, thank you very much. Very kind of you, sir. I hope that we can speak again in a few months.
Talk to you.
Thank you, sir. God bless you. Assalamu alaikum. Gentlemen and viewers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. This is Heather Mehdi signing off with Professor Noam Chomsky.